He said your GPA wasn't a problem. It never came up. Your MCAT wasn't a problem. It never came up. Where you fell short was you failed to separate yourself from other applicants during your interview.
Application Renovation Season 3. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. How are you, Dr. Gray?
I am doing wonderful. I first want to thank you for coming on, being vulnerable. It was a few episodes ago where we released a video and the YouTube comments went crazy of like, I can't believe that kid like allowed Dr. Gray to rip him apart like that. My goal, I hope you know, and for everyone watching, is to really help you understand mistakes that were made, hopefully good things that were that happened as well, so that you can improve your application moving forward. So thank you for coming on and letting me pick apart your application a little bit. But
no, absolutely.
I have a feeling based on the conversation we had before I hit record, you kind of already know where things are going to be going, because
I am fully prepared to be ripped up one side and down the other.
Yes. It came out that you didn't really find me or my material until after you applied. And then looking back through your application, you're like, oh, Lord, okay, now I see. So we're going to dive into that. Before we get into the application, though, part of the conversation we had before I hit record was kind of your journey in terms of the application, applying MD only for a specific reason, and it'll show later on that you're very interested in neurosurgery, and not wanting to apply to DO because kind of your own bias or stigma that, like, if I go the DO route, I can't be a neurosurgeon. And
yeah,
delaying your application to DO schools. But once you did apply to DO schools, the applications started rolling in right off the bat. Why do you think they were to switch there?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing for me was I was such a non-traditional applicant, and we'll probably get into this a little bit, but you know, my journey into deciding to do medicine was so drawn out, and I just have no I had no concept of what medicine entailed when I really decided to do it, and I found out over the past few years. And even I'm still learning today what all goes into this. And so for me, with getting into medicine, I knew that I wanted to get into it. And the only person that I had contact with was an MD surgeon. He was a family friend of mine. And you'll see that that's where a lot of my observation is done is with him. And I think that being so fresh to it, just all the resources and all the like Reddit and everything that you look at will say, like, if you want to be a surgeon, you want to get into a competitive residency, you have to go allopathic. Like you're selling yourself short if you go DO, because so many residencies are allopathic. They're going to pick the allopathic students before they pick you. And so I had automatically written off DO in almost every aspect. I was like, no, that's, to me, even a few months ago when I got the rejection from my in-state school, the allopathic in-state school, my immediate reaction was, well, if I apply DO, am I settling? Like, is this settling if I apply DO? I don't want to settle if that's what it is. And when I dug deeper into it, and we'd talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but my pre-med advisor, one of the best pieces of advice that he gave to me was to look deeper into the DO philosophy, because I do have a background in exercise and nutrition. As we get into my application, you'll see that I have a 1 degree in kinesiology, and then I'm finishing my biology degree this semester. But with that background, it kind of fosters the DO philosophy of mind, body, and spirit being able to utilize that for self-healing. And so that philosophy really lines up with the way that I do want to practice medicine, because I have some of my life experiences with a couple of my grandparents that I was really close to who passed away from neurodegenerative diseases. I want to figure out things that help prevent that from happening, or even be a pioneer in curing or solving those issues, so that you don't have to worry so much about prescribing things. And so when I looked deeper into the DO, I got really excited about it. And then, as you said, I applied DO. It was really late, but I've still gotten a fairly positive response up to this point.
Looking at the rejection that came from your in-state school, you got an interview. Your in-state school is very favorable in terms of who they interview. They typically will interview everyone who applies as in-state, which is great. Gives lots of experience to those students who need the experience of going through an application cycle. You got to the interview, but were ultimately rejected. Have you gotten any feedback from them? Where do you think your application fell short for them?
Yeah, so I've actually spoken with the admissions manager there twice on 2 different occasions post interview, post rejection. And the biggest feedback that he had, and again, I even said this to you before we started recording, was all along the way I had said, if I can just get in front of the interviewing committee, I'll show them how passionate I am about medicine. And oddly enough, the 2 times that I've spoke to the admissions manager about what exactly didn't pop on my application was the interview. He said your GPA wasn't a problem, it never came up. Your MCAT wasn't a problem, it never came up. Yeah. Where you fell short was you failed to separate yourself from other applicants during your interview. And so that was something that for me was really, really jarring, because I didn't expect that at all. When I had called him, I fully expected him to say, your GPA is lacking, especially in the sciences. Your MCAT is a little bit lower than our average. So if you could bring those 2 things up, then you'd be. And so when he was like, your interview was garbage, I was like, man.
So
it was really discouraging.
I will tell you that I have talked to multiple students who have interviewed at that school, and the feedback is almost always the same, that it's the interview. And I don't know if that's just like they just use that as the excuse so they don't have to dig deeper, or if they have a weird interview process where they're looking for something very specific that students just don't happen to elaborate on. I don't know why that's very common, kind of a critique that comes out of the process. I even worked with one of the students myself over the course of a few sessions. They went to interview and still got that same feedback and was ultimately rejected. And so I'm not sure what's going on there interview-wise to give any specific feedback. But with that said, let's go ahead and dive into your application, take a look and see the mistakes that were made. And so just right off the bat, this is application number 2 for you that we're going to look at?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. First thing right off the bat is submission date. You submitted your application in August. Why so late?
So that was because I took my MCAT on August 10th. And because of COVID, we had 2 weeks. So I got my score back in 2 weeks. And you can see that I submitted literally the day after I got my MCAT score back.
Why not submit before taking the MCAT and waiting on that score?
I guess for me, a lot of it, honestly, like I've said, finding your channel has been an eye-opener for a lot of different reasons. But for me, it was, I guess I just never thought about it. I was just like, I'll submit it when I submit my MCAT. And you'll also see I've taken the MCAT 4 times, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But 2 of the scores that I had on there, I guess maybe for me, it was like, well, if I submit it and they see those MCAT scores, I might get written off immediately rather than them waiting. I'm sure I could have probably contacted them to let them know that I was taking the MCAT. But that was the reason for submitting so late.
Okay. All right. So late submission, again, very common. Students don't understand the importance of rolling admissions and applying early. And what they do is they delay submitting an application until they get a score back or until after they take the MCAT so they can work on essays and other stuff. And so very common mistake that's made there. We get into your disadvantaged explanation. I want to talk about your disadvantaged essay because I think this is a great opportunity to just say, hey, like, here's my story. This is what I've had to deal with. And from that story, I can see a lot about you. And we'll look later in your personal statement, more of your disadvantaged essay kind of comes out in your personal statement. But here in your disadvantaged essay, number 1, I find a typo right away. And so typos are like, uh-oh, got to be careful. I don't know if you've seen this. Yeah. Have you seen the typo here?
I did have a cell phone.
Yeah, I did have a cell phone versus I did not have a cell phone. So just small little things like that. automatically make me go, like, what's going on here that the student didn't catch this? Are they reckless? Are they just trying to rush through this? What's going on? So just super small thing. If it's the only thing, it's not going to matter. If it's the start of a trend, maybe something else going on. So something to look out for. But what I didn't like personally about your disadvantaged essay is the comparison, right? At its core, that's what the disadvantaged essay is. It's a comparison of like, here's my story compared to what the quote unquote average or typical student has gone through, the resources they've had, the time to dedicate to certain things that they've had that I haven't had, right? At the core, that's what the disadvantaged essay is. And so I don't think you're doing yourself any favor by bringing it into the essay and saying here, it's a large advantage that financially well-off students have as they do not have to work through college and can solely focus on their studies, right? It just makes it look a little bit petty. And that's a very strong word, but it's just how it rubbed me a little bit of like, focus on your story. You have an amazing story. And most of it comes out in your personal statement. I'm reading it going like, why wasn't this in your disadvantaged essay? Because it shows me a lot of everything you've had to overcome. And yes, I understand that you, compared to someone else who does have those financial advantages, is going to be completely different. But for you to focus on it is a distraction. You don't need to do it.
And I can even see it from rereading it myself. When I went back through, it was like, holy smokes, like, take the woe is me attitude, kid. Like, just tell the story. When I reread it, I was like, that's such a wallowing in self-pity, woe is me type of mentality, instead of just saying, and like you've said throughout all of your videos, is just tell a story that shows how you were impacted by it. Instead, I came here and basically complained about it, and that I don't think was helpful at all.
Yeah, and that's the best way to put it, is that woe is me. A lot of students fear kind of not an unnatural, it's not the right word, but an unfounded fear of like, I don't want people to pity me. And we always say, like, you have to try really hard to have someone pity you in a disadvantaged essay. And I think you're starting to cross that border of like, you should pity me because look at all these other people. They don't have to do anything. So, all right.
Exactly.
You understand that, which is great.
100%.
All right. So we keep going and we get to your transcript. And it looks like it starts off pretty well. Some A's, some B pluses, some A's. And then we hit a brick wall sophomore year. There's a transfer in here that happened. Actually, a couple potentially. It looks like you started off at Oklahoma Wesleyan, Kansas Wesleyan, and then Wichita State, and then Washburn. So lots of schools going on. I'm like, what's going on here? Kind of confused. Not super important. A lot of students fear going to a lot of schools. That's not a big deal. But when I see lots of school changes and a huge dip in grades, I'm like, okay, what happened here? And I think you talk about it in your personal statement. Again, could have been potentially better. We'll look at that in a second. When we look at your grades, one of the things that stands out to me potentially is you have physics 2 here as a D+. It's not listed as a repeat. You did repeat it here. Okay. It's not listed as a repeat because it's a different course. So that's okay. Because that D+ definitely isn't passing for medical school. So that would definitely need to be redone. Calc 2 usually isn't a prereq, so that's not a problem. Intro to programming. C minuses aren't passing for medical school, but because those aren't prereqs, those aren't important. Chemistry 2 here, again, is a D, so I would want to see. It's not marked as a repeat, so I would want to see to make sure that you did take it again, and you did, which is great. Okay. So you have this rough patch, and then all of a sudden, A's. I'm like, okay, so something bad happened potentially, and you fixed it, right? And so when you look at this grade chart, You go, uh-oh, right? 296, 238, 213, but then 4040. Huge upward trend over 50 hours. Perfect, right? There's nothing that you can do GPA-wise that is going to rectify your lower 335 cumulative, or not cumulative, your BCPM, your science GPA. And so this is just something for everyone out there. When you go onto Reddit or Student Doctor Network and say, hey, I have a 335 GPA, what are my chances? This is the exact reason why every first comment after that post should be, what's the trend in your grades? Because if it's the opposite trend, right? If a student started off 4040, 213, 238, 296, that tells a completely different story than your trend. Your trend tells the story of wasn't a super stellar student, really fell off a cliff, and then picked it up. Something changed, whether financial stability, something else, something changed. You figured it out. Good job. You've proven academic success. Nothing more that you need to do. Okay. We get to MCAT. You talked about it earlier. You took the MCAT 4 times, finally broke that 500 barrier. What was it like to get that score back?
I was super disappointed, actually. So you'll see the 499 on there and the 505 that are within 8 weeks of each other. So when I started studying for this MCAT, I took my diagnostic. My diagnostic for that one was a 503. And I had actually worked up all the way to, I took 16 practice exams prior to these MCATs. And I had worked it all the way up to consistently scoring in the 512 to 515 region. And so to get these scores back was actually super crushing for me. I still don't know what happened on the June 20th one that you see there, the 499. And one of the weird little trends here is that the 491 that you see is in Topeka, where I took it in Topeka. The 499 I took in Topeka. And these are, so the 498 and the 505, I took at a testing center in Kansas City. And so I'm not sure if there has something to do with traveling an hour in the mornings to get there that allowed me to get the wheels turning, that allowed me to score 6 points better and 7 points better on those exams. Wow. But I don't know. I don't know if there was something to that or not. With the 505 score, you'll see 127 was pretty normal for me on Chem Phys. Cars was always all over the place for me. It could have been anywhere from 124 all the way up to I've scored 129 on that section before. Biochem was typically in the 129 area, and where I really disappointed myself was in that psych soc. I scored lower than a 128 on a practice exam on those, and then just I don't know, ran out of gas, I guess, when it came to the real deal. Yeah. But it was super kind of crushing. Yeah.
All right. So MCAT, obviously 505 isn't outstanding, not amazing, but it's good. It's a good score, right? It's a solid score. And definitely being interviewed by your state school again, whether or not they thought it was good enough, it seems like they told you it was good enough. A 505 is a good score and definitely is enough to get you in, right? This is where I talk about, is it good enough? And you have a great story there in your trend line of your MCAT as well, from 491 to 505. That's a huge increase.
And those first 2 that I took too should have never even been in the vicinity of an MCAT to take both of those. So that was also another mistake that I learned. So. Okay. All
right. And then we get into your activities. And I think the first 2, in my mind, these shouldn't even be on your application. Right? The first 2 are, this was going to be research that this is going to be research that I'm doing in the future. And the second one is, this was going to be a trip that I was going to take with COVID. Right? These should not be on your application, period.
I will say the only reason that I put them on there was I went to KU's open house, and they said due to COVID, if there was anything that was canceled or if there's anything that you're doing during COVID, they were like, put it on there. And so that was because I would have been in the same camp of being like, well, I didn't go on the missions trip, so that I don't have the experience of the missions trip. But the only reason that I did put that on there was they were like, if you had something that you were going to do that was canceled due to COVID, they were like, put it on there. So that was the only reason that I had that.
Did Kansas have a secondary essay that asked about COVID?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they
so
did.
That's where it should have gone.
Save it for there.
And most likely that's what they were talking about.
Okay.
Maybe not, but yeah. All right. And then we have conferences attended. So you have this open house and you have a pre-med conference. These are typically not activities that I see on a application. Why did you put those on here?
Well, the big reason that I put them on there was that my pre-med advisor had said, if you go to these conferences, my goal was to attend my in-state school. And he said they like to see that you've attended their open houses and some of their conferences. Okay. And so he was like, make sure you put those in your activities section. Okay.
So remember, your application goes to every school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's really hard and silly to try to craft your primary application to one school when it goes out to every school.
Right.
Okay? So if you want to go to University of Kansas, you went to their open house, you went to their pre-med conference, and you want to highlight that, well, that's potentially, again, for the secondary essay, not for your primary application. Okay. And at the end of the day, for me, the activity section is who are you? What impact have you had on the world in the activities that you've done? What has been filling up your time? And a 2-hour open house and a 6-hour pre-med conference, those are things that almost every pre-med student is doing. And so I don't really need to see that on an application. I just assume that students are doing those things, and it's not going to impact one way or another the application. Hopefully what's happening is Kansas on the other side is keeping track of who's coming to these things so that they can go, oh yeah, I remember that student. They came to our open house. All right.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Next one here, presentations, posters, this Washburn transformational experience. You say this is a semester-long activity, but it's only 20 hours.
Mm-hmm.
How do those two connect?
So, yeah, it honestly probably was a little bit. So it was actually during a class, we had the option to, so this was in a kinesiology, current literature in kinesiology was the class. And we had this semester long presentation that we were building up to. And so we worked on it throughout the entire semester. And then at the end of the semester, if you wanted it to be a Washburn transformational experience, which you get a medallion for when you graduate, you have to present it to another class. And so I basically what I was putting on here was I was estimating that I probably spent around 20 hours outside of class working on it up to giving the presentation. And the presentation was 30 minutes. Okay. So that was how I calculated that.
Got it. All right. All right. So not super impactful there. We get to your WU Moves clinic. You talk about this clinic being open to the public, mostly working with geriatric patients who are post-op, or just the general public. So basically everyone.
Yeah. It's for, so the reason for it is for disadvantaged people. So you actually have to go through a whole application process where they screen you for your socioeconomic status. And if you meet the criteria for disadvantage that they have, then you're allowed to exercise in the facilities.
Great. Story, right? Again, I'm a big fan of stories. If you showed me your impact through a story interacting with one of these clients or patients, that would have been much more impactful here.
Yeah.
Your next one is shadowing. Lots of shadowing hours here. Great job getting some shadowing hours. The experience description for this is very short. If I were to try to calculate it, it's probably close to 250 characters versus the 700 that you're given. Don't shortchange your character count just because it's shadowing or just because you marked it as most meaningful and you're going to put all the important stuff in the most meaningful. Don't lose an opportunity to show your impact in one way or another.
Yeah.
Shadowing is kind of a broad blanket that I have. is typically shadowing shouldn't be marked as most meaningful. And that's because in my mind, shadowing is a very passive experience.
Right.
Now, there are what students will say, well, during shadowing, I was able to do patient histories and do this and do that. And then I say, well, that wasn't shadowing, right? That was something else, which is great. And definitely talk about that. But for me, shadowing, while very exciting, I very, very much still remember my shadowing experiences and how mesmerizing they were and how exciting they were. But are they most meaningful? No, they weren't most meaningful in my life. And remember, most meaningful on the application is most meaningful to you as a person, not most meaningful to you on your journey to be a physician. Okay.
Sure.
And a lot of people confuse the two, and they say most meaningful should only be shadowing, clinical, and research. Those are the three most meaningful that you should mark. And it's just, I can't tell you what's most meaningful to you. Okay.
Yeah.
So what typically happens when shadowing is marked as most meaningful is something that happened in your essay, where your most meaningful experience remarks are all about the doctor. They're not about you.
Sure.
Okay. And so very common thing that happens, because again, shadowing is passive. There's not a lot that happens, and there's really nothing else to talk about except the doctor.
Yeah. One question on these. So one of the little pieces of feedback that I got. So I didn't even get interviewed. So I went to high school in Arkansas. So I had strong ties to Arkansas, and didn't get an interview. I requested some feedback as to why not. One of her biggest remarks. So I got completely differing things from Arkansas and KU. With Arkansas, they said your MCAT's not competitive, your GPA is not competitive, and you don't have enough diversity in your shadowing. And so is that of your opinion as well, when you only see shadowing under one physician and one specialty as being an issue?
Yeah, it's a common fear. And I think some medical schools like Arkansas will have that sort of pushback, especially for a state school potentially, where their mission maybe is to pump out primary care. And they see
and that was
your application is all around neurosurgery. And maybe they don't have the bandwidth to support that. Maybe they don't have a neurosurgery residency at their school. And I don't know off the top of my head. And so maybe they look at that and they go, well, you are not a good fit for our mission. And our feedback is you need more diversity in your shadowing. When really what they're saying is, we don't think you're interested in primary care because all of your shadowing is around neurosurgery.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to parse words a little bit when you're thinking about it.
Sure.
My take on this, it's a very common question that we get in terms of, should I shadow more than one type of doctor, more than one doctor, etc. My response is always, it's hard enough to find one person to shadow, one physician to shadow. Me as a medical school, right? If I were to say I'm a medical school, I wouldn't want to burden a student to say, no, you must shadow 3 different specialties, one in a surgical specialty, one in a primary care specialty, and one in whatever else, right? And it's just ridiculous to expect that from students, because again, it's hard enough to find one. And who are the students who are finding shadowing easily? Well, there are already privileged students who mommy and daddy are doctors or in healthcare, and all their neighbors are doctors, and they can just go knock on some doors and say, hey, like Johnny's parents, can I shadow you tomorrow? So that's my take on diversity and shadowing. Again, my take on it is probably they didn't like neurosurgery specifically, and they wanted more primary care exposure to make sure.
That was the big thing that she said. I remember distinctly her saying, we really like to see shadowing under primary care physicians because we don't believe that you get to encounter the physician-patient relationship in a surgical specialty as you would with a primary care physician. And so,
right. That's just ignorance because because surgeons see patients outside of the operating room, right? Surgeons have clinic days where they see patients. So.
Yeah.
It's silly.
Well, and that was always one of my things, because I was thinking back, I was with him on one of his clinic days, and you would see patients that he had done surgery on that were following up with him. And I was like, well, that doesn't, because they seem to have a relationship. And that, one of the things that I always remember is how much they appreciated what he did for him. And so I was like, I feel like it's there, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, no, that's some ignorance. That's okay.
So, and then one other question on this. So since then, I have diversified, and I am in a fortunate position that this neurosurgeon that I observe is a family friend, and so I was then able to ask him, "Hey, do you have any family care physicians that you would recommend? Do you have any sports medicine docs that you would recommend?" And he has a pretty wide network, and he was able to put me in touch with 4 different physicians and 4 different specialties, and so I've been able to diversify that over the past few months.
Good.
And so with that, if I end up going another application cycle, do you recommend putting all the shadowing in one section?
Yep.
Or, okay.
Yep. One activity, just list it and say, Dr. Smith, Dr. Johnson, Dr. whatever, this specialty, this many hours, these dates. Just list it. You don't need a story. You don't need explanations. Yeah. We have community service, this Easter Seals Capper Foundation, 8 hours. Again, could have been a story. It's very common for students. You have this listed as medical clinical, and yet you said half of the day was spent sending out New Year's letters. I'm like, don't focus on non-clinical things. Another just minor thing here, exclamation points. Don't put them in your application. This isn't an informal blog post like, I'm so excited! Exclamation point. They don't care. Getting into your complete nutrition general manager. So you have your experience description, responsible for overseeing staff. How many staff? Responsible for regulating inventory. How much money in inventory? You could have shown impact through numbers in that way, and that would have been good. And then you have, for your most meaningful remarks here, the sales pitch, right? And I don't know if you saw this, but it was all based around, hey, I was doing this while I was studying. This was a learning experience because I had to do it while I was in school. So you're repetitive a little bit. You talked about how to encounter people effectively, how to run a staff, how to schedule things responsibly, how to handle uncomfortable situations, how to interview people, how to communicate, how to run a successful business. But lots of how-tos in this really long run-on sentence where it's like, I have all of these skills, and it's really important. Okay. Hard work and dedication, interaction with people. Very confusing sentence here. I mostly love the interaction with people. The other owners were not present most of the time. Yeah. It was a very confusing sentence. So,
I can,
so again, kind of that sentence along with that lack of, I did not have a cell phone until 18. I'm like, maybe the student didn't really do a good job looking over their application.
Agree.
We continue on your football experiences here. Football and basketball. Your football experience doesn't really talk about football. You talk about, we did a lot of volunteering to help clean up small cities in the surrounding area. Hey, talk about football. Talk about your most memorable game or whatever, right? Your most memorable practice.
Sure.
And then the basketball one, same thing, right? It's like, in terms of the experience description itself, it didn't really talk about basketball. It talked about complaining of like, well, the school I was from didn't prepare me well enough, so I quit.
Yeah.
Right. So there was a little bit of a red flag there as well. And then we get to your personal statement. And this first paragraph, I'm not sure why this paragraph is here.
Well, I had talked to you about, I had rewritten this personal statement about 14 times. And I had 7 different people look over it. And the most common feedback that I got, because I tried to originally pack so much into my personal statement that it came across as really shallow. The most feedback that I got was, you're trying to touch on so many different things that nobody can connect to anything. And so one of the people that I got the most feedback from was he said, find something that happened that impacted you and wash it out. He was like, he said, start with what's impacted you a lot with your first paragraph and wash it out. And I came back. I think he's talking about be more detailed with it, show how it impacted you, rather than trying to touch on so many little things that you can't give enough detail on how it impacted you. Pick one thing and elaborate heavily on it. So, and I, when I look back on it, this person was actually a PhD student currently. And I'm just not sure if the feedback was necessarily appropriate obviously for this. When I go back and reread it, I think it's a flawed approach.
Yeah, because the personal statement is, why do you want to be a doctor? Not, let me tell you a story about an impactful moment in my life. Unless that impactful moment led to you wanting to be a doctor. And so right off the bat, in my mind, we have this distraction paragraph of like, what's going on here? Why am I reading this? We keep reading, and then we have more of this disadvantaged essay, right? Of like, these are a lot of the disadvantaged parts of the disadvantaged essay that should be up in the disadvantaged essay. And then the sales pitch of it developed my work ethic and running a business while in college, taught me how to address confrontation, lead, and communicate effectively. Right? The sales pitch of like, oh, look, I have all the skills necessary to be a doctor. Above all, I fell in love with bringing joy to people's lives by enhancing their quality of life through health. Okay. So I shifted my academic focus from engineering to biology in order to further my knowledge of the human body and rededicated my energies to performing better in my coursework. Okay, great. So now I see that you're interested in health, wellness, biology, helping people. You haven't told me anything about being interested in medicine yet, although your next sentence specifically says, when medicine became my new focus. I'm like, whoa, like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and why?
Yes, why? So very, very good pickup on that. Why, right? And then this whole next paragraph is basically your transcript. Like, I did better. I got 4 O's. I majored in this. I went to this school. Right? This is all your transcript. So it doesn't need to be in your personal statement.
Yeah.
And then we get to, I've participated in 100 hours of shadowing under Dr. So-and-so, a neurosurgeon, right? That's in your activity list. I don't need you to rehash that here. During this time, it was not his skill or brilliance, blah, 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 right? Again, it's all about the doctor again.
Yeah.
And then we get to just this summer, I had planned a volunteer trip, blah, 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 right? Again, that was in your activities list. It shouldn't have been your activities list. It doesn't need to be in your personal statement either. So just lots of rehashing stuff that's already in your application. And then this next paragraph again is, I have a mature mindset. I have leadership, hard work, understanding the body from a functional perspective down to the chemical and biological levels, right? You're basically saying like, dude, I don't even need to go to medical school. I already know how the body works. Just give me a chisel and a hammer. I'm good to go. Right?
Just give me my white coat.
Just give me my white coat. So, just very common mistakes here. And as we said before we hit record, you looking back at your essay, you're like, I didn't even talk about why I want to be a doctor. Right?
Didn't even talk about it. It's alarming to me that 7 different people that are in a health profession read this, and not one of them was like, hey, maybe tell why you wanted to go into medicine. I will say, one of the things that I didn't listen to was, so one of the people that read this was the neurosurgeon that paragraph is about. And he said, the personal statement's pretty good, although I don't think that the paragraph about me is necessary. I would take that out. Good. And I was like, nah. What is he though?
All right. And then we get to your school list. So personal statement obviously didn't do you any justice. Your school list. You have 1, 2, 3. Wait, where'd it go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 public out-of-state schools. Actually 9, because one of them is your in-state school. Why so many out-of-state public schools?
Yeah, because I did the mistake that everybody does. I went on MSAR and I slid everything to where my MCAT was and where my GPA was, and I thought, you know what, and then you would go and look, and you'd look at how many out of state applied, 2,000, and how many were accepted, 17. You're like, guess I'm going to be one of the 17.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, exactly. So I ended up applying there, and then obviously Arkansas is out of state, but I have strong ties to it, so that was the only reason for that one. Minnesota, I don't know if it's considered strong ties. This was something that I probably should have dug deeper on. I do have family that lives in Minnesota. It's not immediate family, but they do live there. One of them that I was kind of surprised of was New Mexico. So my sister-in-law, she actually went to UNM for law, and she practices in Albuquerque, and that wasn't even a strong enough tie for them to even allow it. They were like, nope, unless you went to high school here or you've lived here for the past year, that's the only appeal that we'll accept if you're out of state. And so that one was kind of shot down. West Virginia, I have extended family that lives out there. So, but then the other ones were really just like, yeah, I mean, I could see us living there. So, and then the other one that I didn't put on here, and for me, it's probably just the bad experience, is that I grew up 14 years of my life was in Michigan. And I didn't apply to any Michigan schools, even though I have pretty strong ties there, just because I think a lot of my memory of Michigan isn't so great.
Yeah. All right. So some things to work on for next time, but hopefully you don't need to work on it with these interviews that are coming in for DO schools, and hopefully we'll get in to a DO school. Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, so I did have, if I do go another application cycle, do you recommend taking the MCAT again?
Do you want to take the MCAT again?
No, I don't.
Yeah. So a 505 is a good score. A better score will only open more doors for you. Do you have to retake it? No. I probably would try to retake it again with that 124 in the psych soaps section. You left a lot of points on the table there.
Yep. If I do end up not getting in anywhere this cycle, what would be your advice for what I should do over the next year? I know for a lot of people, you say do what you want to do, whatever you would enjoy doing, And so I'm trying to figure out, for me, I didn't have a lot of clinical experience. And so I've thought that maybe it would be worth it to get in as into any sort of clinical role where I can get more patient contact.
Yeah. That's my go-to is your lack of clinical experience is pretty profound. And so I would definitely try to get some clinical experience.
Okay. Last one that I have, I read your book over interviews, and I read your personal statement book.
I have a new one too that I can send you.
Yes, I know. I was going to pre-order it and then I forgot. But so the interview style of the school that I interviewed with on Monday was MMI. Okay. What is your recommendation? Is it even a possibility to mock interview for an MMI?
It is.
And how?
Yeah, I recommend doing at least only one mock interview for an MMI. I think the MMI is actually a very easy interview because at the end of the day, it's just a game. And if you can allow yourself to role play and be part of that game, it's very easy to go, you know what? It's just like the way I've been explaining it lately. It's like going to Thanksgiving dinner and crazy Uncle Johnny comes, right? Everyone knows crazy Uncle Johnny. He's a little out there. And he always brings up the most crazy things about UFOs and aliens and the COVID vaccine being microchipped. And you have this.
Oh, you're talking about Uncle David.
You're Uncle David. But the conversation is basically, hey, the scenario is you're sitting down at Thanksgiving dinner, and your family member says X, Y, and Z. How do you respond? Right? That's what the MMI is. Here's this random scenario. What are your thoughts?
I thought that it was felt really good when I went through it, because working at Complete Nutrition with training, we do role playing all the time, or we did role playing all the time when I was there, and so I felt like that side of it wasn't as awkward for me when because I only got one breakout room where I was actually supposed to role play with somebody, but when I did it, I didn't feel like it was super uncomfortable for me. So I hope that was went all right.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the MMI book is on my list of to-dos because the current MMI book is not very good.
Really.
All right. Yeah. Well, good luck to you. Hopefully, again, some of these schools pull through and you don't need this feedback, but hopefully this feedback will be useful for other people.
Well, and it's for me, for that was a big thing for me, is like, you know what, if I have there, because I know how helpful it was for me to see people who were in a similar situation that I was. And for me, it was, you know, if there's somebody that's in a similar spot that I'm in, I hope that they can learn from what I did, even if this cycle does end up working out. And then it was, you know, a double positive for me, because I was like, if it doesn't work out, you know, I need this help. So,
well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, Dr. Gray. Thanks for having me.